This is Phantoms and Monsters Radio, where the veil lifts one story at a time. Now, if you're new here, welcome to the show. So, tonight's presentation explores the horrifying encounters reported inside abandoned buildings and forgotten spaces where the past refuses to stay silent. From deserted psychiatric hospitals to decaying jails, military warehouses, collapsed roadway tunnels, and hidden forest structures, these witnesses came face to face with entities that defy explanation. Massive winged creatures, invisible predators, mirrored men, skeletal figures, and demon like humanoids all emerged from the shadows when the explorers least expected it. Each report reveals how the abandoned and overlooked places around us often conceal forces far more terrifying than ghosts and urban legends. These chilling accounts challenge our understanding of what moves through the derelict structures of America and beyond. Now, in this first account, something dark and impossibly black leaped across the roadside near the abandoned Trenton Psychiatric Hospital, startling a late-night paranormal explorer who expected ghosts, not a creature that defied all known New Jersey wildlife. Her brief glimpse of the bushy-tailed, oversized canine left her questioning whether she had stumbled into a dogman encounter lurking in the shadows of one of the state's most haunted facilities. So she writes, if I can find it here. Hi, I was born and raised in North New Jersey. My boyfriend and close friends enjoyed exploring mysterious locations throughout the state. One day I discovered an intriguing spot in Trenton, New Jersey, an abandoned child orphanage that once operated as an insane asylum. Now, it was late at night, around 10 p.m., and we were following the GPS to the location, hoping to avoid encountering the police or being chased away. Our goal was to gain access to the buildings, which were formerly known as the Trenton Psychiatric Hospital. Now, as we drove past the orphanage, I was focused on scoping out the area for security rather than looking for cryptids or other creatures. Suddenly, out of nowhere, I saw something dark, blacker than black, in the shape of a canine. It was mid-leap, disappearing from view next to the side of the road. I only caught a glimpse of its lower body from the mid-torso to the tail as it jumped out of sight and scared the life out of me. What stood out most was its tail. It resembled a fox's tail, bushy and large. However, this creature was larger than a big dog and much bigger than a coyote. I certainly wasn't out that night expecting to see something like this. I was there for a ghost hunt. I turned to my boyfriend who was driving and asked if he had seen what I did, but he hadn't. That made sense because it was on my side of the car and very dark. I never saw the creature's face or upper body. It leaped from the roadside into the brush next to the building. It was moving on all fours, but New Jersey doesn't have wolves or anything that fits that description of what I witnessed. I researched all the native animals in New Jersey and nothing matched what I saw. If I had encountered this creature in a more rural state, I might have kept an open mind. But given that New Jersey doesn't have any animals like that, I'm skeptical. I've never seen a dogman or a Bigfoot, but I believe they exist. Sometimes I wonder if that's why or what I encountered, a dogman or another type of canine creature. I know I wasn't imagining things. What I saw was darker than the night itself, and it terrified me. Again, this incident occurred in Trenton, New Jersey around 10:11 p.m. Now, this next account. A group of teenagers crossing an abandoned paintball field in Puerto Rico expected only silence and darkness, not the thunderous charge of a horned creature with dim red eyes that emerged from behind them. What began as a routine shortcut home became a terrifying encounter that four witnesses still struggle to explain more than a decade later. I live in Puerto Rico. Back in 2009, four friends and I were walking home from a basketball game in the suburbs near our neighborhood. It was around 8 p.m. and it was dark. There were two ways to enter my neighborhood. The first was the shortcut, which involved cutting through the middle of an abandoned paintball park in an open field and took about 10 minutes to reach our homes. The second was the long way, which involved walking 25 to 30 minutes in a well-lit area surrounded by houses and illuminated streets, eventually leading to the entrance of the abandoned park, followed by another 5 minutes of walking in semi-illuminated areas. We took the shortcut, as we always did, but this time everything was quiet, no animal sounds, uh, no cars in the distance, just pure silence. Now, one of my friends jokingly suggested that it would be cool to play Ouija in the middle of the field. Now, we all collectively told him to be quiet because the idea scared us. As we approached the park entrance, we started to feel less anxious and began talking again. We were about 100 feet from the entrance when we all heard and felt heavy stumps coming from behind us. These were not ordinary footsteps. It sounded like an elephant or a bull running. We turned around and saw a strange creature with dim red eyes and horns. Now, as it got closer, we noticed it had a grayish color and was charging toward us. There was a part of the street that was briefly overlooked the field, so we all looked to see if we could spot anything. All we could see were the dim red dots staring directly at us. We rushed home and spent the next day trying to make sense of what had just happened. Four of us confirmed this story. Sadly, one of my friends passed away a couple of years ago. I also moved away, but I have to travel back to the area every weekend to visit my family. It still gives me the creeps to go through there at night. Now, this next account, a Halloween drive to an abandoned cement plant turned terrifying when the building suddenly lit up and revealed 24 towering, muscular figures standing motionless in the windows. Their synchronized hair movement, featureless black silhouettes, and impossible appearance left five teenagers shaken and silent, wondering for decades if they had encountered the beings known as the mirrored men. So the witness tells me, my story references mirrored men. At first, I didn't connect my experiences with mirrored men or an abduction, but the more I thought about it, the similarities became evident. This is a true story that happened when I was 16. I'm now 45. I had hesitated to share my story because it sounds crazy. I grew up believing in demonic activity and strange occurrences, so I never dismissed the bizarre. My mother had many unexplained experiences throughout her childhood and adulthood, so nothing seemed out of the ordinary. My experience is just one of many, but I have to say it's probably the craziest. So here's what happened. I grew up in a small town, and this particular event took place in an even smaller one. As I mentioned, I was 16 at the time. My best friend and I worked at a fast food restaurant, and our boyfriends usually picked us up from work. It was early enough, or the weekends we often went to one of our homes. Otherwise, he would just drop me off at home. My mom was very lenient, so I didn't have to tell her what I was doing. She knew who I was with and trusted that I'd be home. So that night happened to be Halloween. And instead of our usual routine, someone suggested we drive around before we had to go home. It was about 8 p.m. There was an old, long closed cement plant in a smaller town, and just hearing about it made it sound creepy. I had only heard of it once before, and that night I found myself on the way there. Now, I wasn't afraid. I was enjoying the time with my friends. It was my best friend, another girl, and our two boyfriends in the car. The old plant was once a thriving business built in the early 1900s, but has long since closed down. It was situated on the outskirts of town along a lonely 2-lane road with no streetlights, well beyond any residential area. The drive out to the plant took about 15 minutes. My boyfriend was driving. I was sitting in the front passenger seat, and the other three were in the back. We pulled up to the plant on our left, but my boyfriend did a U-turn and parked along the fence with the plant now to our right. We were talking about how old the place was and what it must have been like in the early days. The lot was littered with machine parts and debris, making it easy to see in the dark. We hadn't been there more than 5 minutes when the two guys decided to get out and explore closer to the fence for a more dramatic experience. It wasn't scary, but the guys were making noises to try to scare us girls. We started laughing, but abruptly stopped. Out of nowhere, lights illuminated the doorway and the windows of the abandoned building. It was as if someone flipped the switch that lit up 20 to 30 windows simultaneously. Standing in the light were huge, muscular, tall men with long hair. They didn't walk up to the light. They were already there, as if standing on a balcony or ledge. All the figures were uniform in size and stature, silent and motionless. They had clenched fists and appeared to be wearing work boots. Now, I hadn't noticed any wind blowing before, but their long hair was swaying softly, all in unison. You could see their muscular arms, but curiously, they were featureless. You could only infer that they were men. Their bodies were like shadows, darker than black. You couldn't make out the facial features of the clothing. They just stood there completely still. I don't know how we stared in shock until my friend broke the silence with a scream, and the two boys ran back to the car. We sped away from the dirt-packed area by the fence back onto the pavement, riding in complete silence. My boyfriend was the first to ask what we had just witnessed. None of us really knew, but we all saw them. We never discussed it right after that night, and not once in the 29 years since, but we're still friends, by the way. Now, over the years, this experience has stayed with me, and I often wonder if it really happened. Did I remember the layout correctly? Since it looks different from the pictures I see of the building now. Could it have been possible that the electricity was still working, or perhaps a homeless camp had taken over the old plant? If that were true, why were all the lights off before we arrived? Why didn't they yell down at us to leave? Why hadn't they moved? Were they actually 20 to 30 things that looked like men outside the building? Why was there no news report about us teenagers being out there if we disturbed someone? How could we see their dark outlines so clearly, despite them having no features or noticeable clothing? While we could only see each other's clothing in the dark. None of it makes any sense. I don't know what happened tonight, but I know what I saw. Now, in this next account, a peaceful fall afternoon in the Havens Woods of Milwaukee turned terrifying when two boys realized something invisible was stalking them from all sides, long before it chose to reveal itself. What finally stepped from behind the trees was towering, wolf-like creature standing upright, watching them with predatory intent and leaving a lifelong imprint of fear and disbelief. Now, the witness says, my sighting happened in the early 1980s when I was 13 years old. It was a sunny fall afternoon in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, specifically in the Haven Woods, which is on a military base. Now, back then, you could access the woods. There was a BMX track out there. My friends and I went into the woods in search of our friends. My bike had a flat tire, so we decided to walk. And as we got closer to the BMX track, we could hear our friends. By the time we arrived, everyone was gone. We started to walk back the way we came. Now, as we walked, we could hear something moving alongside us in the woods. We yelled, "Who's out there?" But received no answers, so we continued walking. Now we could hear something in front of us walking on the trail, but we saw nothing. We yelled again, "Who's out there?" But got no response again. We kept walking, and on the other side of us, something else seemed to be keeping pace with us. Yes, yet it was invisible to our eyes. I began to feel afraid. We turned around and started walking back towards the BMX track, but once again, we sensed the same presence in front of us. It was really frightening. I knew the railroad tracks were to my left, so I said to my buddy, "Let's go to the tracks and get the hell out of here." I turned around, and 10 feet away from me, standing on its hind legs next to a tree, was a creature I had never seen before. It was 8 to 10 feet tall, very dark and well built like a wolf. It was staring at us, and its mouth open as if I were its prey. I froze. I, th- I thought I screamed, but no sound came out. It felt like we were frozen for 5 minutes, but it was only a matter of seconds. This creature seemed to look straight through my soul. I finally regained some composure, and we ran as fast as we could to the business outside the woods, hammering on the locked glass door. It was a Sunday afternoon and they were closed, so we ran home through a creek. I told my mom about the experience, but she dismissed it, saying it must have seen a dog, or that something might have someone may have been trying to scare us. The thing is, in every direction we turned, that presence was walking with us, unseen, until it wanted to reveal itself. And it was a sunny afternoon. Now, since that day, I have believed in the supernatural. I've been in those woods plenty of times since, but I've never seen anything like that again. It took me years to return to that area. Now, back in the day, there was a prisoner of war camp there in the 1940s and a missile site in the 1950s and 60s. I know there are many tunnels underground, but the government filled them in and flooded the area. So I guess there would be plenty of places for this thing to live underground. Is there anyone else in the area that has had a similar experience to mine? This being was invisible, tracking us until it chose to be seen. I feel fortunate to have lived through it. To me, the closest thing to what it looked like was the werewolf on the American Werewolf in London film. So, if you're enjoying tonight's presentation and want to hear more about more stories like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Fams and Monsters Radio. It really helps us reach out to more people who are searching for answers about the unexplained. And make sure to click the notification bell so you won't miss any of our live shows. So, in this next account, a group of kids exploring abandoned railroad tunnels in western Pennsylvania stumbled upon what looked like a skeletal figure holding a scythe and guarding the entrance like the silent reaper in the woods. What began as pure terror turned into a baffling mystery when the figure later vanished completely, leaving behind questions about natural illusion, symbolism, and the strange history around those tunnels. Witness states, when I was a kid growing up in western Pennsylvania, there was an old abandoned railroad in the woods near my house. The railroad ran through a valley with a large winding creek. There were several cuts and tunnels through the hills of the ravines and valleys on either side of the creek. I'm pretty sure the railroad closed down in the early 1900s, and by the 1980s, it had become overgrown. The tunnels were in an advanced state of collapse and resembled natural caves. Now, needless to say, it was the perfect area for playing and exploring the woods, at least from a kid's perspective. I'm pretty sure that most parents wouldn't want their 11-year-olds exploring abandoned railroad tunnels. So one year we had an exceptionally warm December, and I had a few friends staying over at my house for Christmas break. Naturally, I wanted to take them down to the railroad tunnels. I probably hadn't been there since the summer. Now, as we approached one of the tunnels, we were suddenly stopped in our tracks. In front of the tunnel stood a gray skeletal figure holding a scythe. We took off running back the way we came. My neighborhood was about a half mile to a mile away, mostly uphill, and we burst out of the woods breathless in one of my neighborhood's backyards. He was doing some yard work and was obviously curious about what we had been up to. We told him what we saw, and he assured us that we had not actually seen the Grim Reaper. He offered to go back into the woods with us, so we all trekked back down the creek with my neighbor. Now, when we arrived at the tunnel, sure enough, there it was, a skeletal figure, gray and wearing a black cloak with a distorted, twisted body and holding up the scythe, which looked like an extension of one of its arms. The figure stood there motionless, silently guarding the entrance to the tunnel. My neighbor gestured for us to hide, and he and the Grim Reaper had a stare down that seemed to last forever. Then he suddenly started laughing so hard that the tears streamed down his face, and he had to sit down. He told us to come out and take a look. It turned out to be a tree that had been struck by lightning. The trunk had basically exploded. The bark still attached in places give the appearance of a cloak, which, while the twisted and exposed portions of the trunk looked like a body, head, arm, and scythe. It probably happened a few months. It probably happened a few months earlier, and the exposed wood had weathered to a gray color. Even knowing the cause, it still looked super freaky, and we were glad to leave. The figure was so perfect, it almost looked like someone had carved it out with a chainsaw, but the wood was too rough and split for what to have been the case. It was the completely natural phenomena. A few months later, I returned with a camera and some friends to show them the Reaper in the woods, but it was completely gone. I couldn't even find remnants of the trunk or the root system of the tree. It just vanished. It is worth noting that we often found satanic graffiti in the railroad tunnels. Pentagrams and similar designs were spray painted on the stone cliffs and walls within and around the tunnel. It also appeared that many people had used the tunnels for parties, getting high, etc., as we sometimes found syringes and burnt spoons. I haven't been back to the checked area in over 20 years, but I keep telling myself that one day when I'm home visiting, I'm going to take a trek back into the woods and see how things are holding up. Ken Full, thank you for your donation. Much appreciated. Now, this next account, a childhood night on an abandoned Air Force base turned into a lifelong mystery when a 12-year-old awoke to intruders silently moving through the house before paralyzing him and carrying out a painful procedure he could only describe as an alien encounter. Decades later, he still remembers the shrieking sound forced into his ear and the telepathic voice that tried to reassure him while the Greys worked in the dimly lit room. Now, the witness states, in 1969, at the age of 12 or 13, we lived on an abandoned U.S. Air Force base. It was great to gather with other kids playing and discovering all the leftover artillery, coins, tunnels, and more. Sometimes families would discuss what they had seen in the night sky or share stories about ghosts haunting the airport buildings. They often tried to scare each other with these tales. No matter what you did on that base, you always felt like you were being watched by your parents or the airport manager, county workers, or other parents, or just that strange feeling that something was there in spirit or lurking around the corner. I hated that constant sensation. On this basis, we lived in the old barracks building that had been converted into the home for a family. It was a little cramped, but it was our life there. The night we were visited seemed like any other night. I was watching TV when my parents told me it was time for bed. I shared a room with my younger brother, but that night neither of us remembered what had occurred. I think it was around 2 a.m. when I was awakened to some noises coming from the front of the house. I first heard the sound of things being looked over, soft rattles and subtle scuffing of chairs being moved, as if someone was trying not to wake anyone. I burrowed deeper into my bed, trying to remain as silent as possible so that whatever was happening wouldn't know I was awake. By that time, they were coming through my sister's room, which was just before mine. The layout of the house was a bit strange. You had to pass through my sister's room to get to mine, and then to my parents' room. As I heard them approaching, stayed completely still, attempting to feign unconsciousness. They seemed to linger in my sister's bedroom for a short time before entering mine. I could feel their presence around my bed. I was lying on my side, facing the wall in a fetal position, so that I couldn't see them just yet. Suddenly, I felt something being shoved into my ear canal, producing a screeching noise that was unbearable. I started screaming at the top of my lungs for help, but no sound came out. They rolled me over to face him, and I felt my covers pulled off my bed. It seemed like I lay there in a state of paralysis for an indefinite period of time, unable to move. Then I found myself in another room that was dimly lit. Strangely, it looked like my bedroom, but different. I could now see them. On each side of me were what you might call gray aliens, and they were performing some procedure, sticking things inside of me. The pain was excruciating. Above my head was another one, taller than the other two on either side. I heard a voice in my mind reassuring me, saying, "It's okay, you're fine, and it won't take long." It was a female voice. I have no idea how long I was paralyzed before I was returned home. The next thing I remember is being released. However, I still couldn't move or yell until they were gone. Once I was able to move, I jumped out of the bed and ran to my parents' room, screaming at the top of my lungs. In my panic, I struggled to turn on their light switch, flicking it on and off like a strobe light. My dad jumped out of bed to find out what was happening. I explained that something or someone had been in our house, but despite our search, nothing was found. Now, I understand that some unknown entities visited me. I guess that they were aliens, as there have been several sightings reports of activity in our area, which I will later discuss, and it will discuss in later chapters. Now, since that night, I have lived with the noise that was used to paralyze me. It would awaken me occasionally until I was 27. It would start at a low level, then peak to an unbearable intensity, reminiscent of the first experience. These paralyzing events reoccurred sporadically for several years. In talking with others who have had similar experience, I learned that they too had undergone the same paralyzing events related to abduction when this occurred. So, in this next account, a classified encounter inside an abandoned warehouse on a military base in Iraq left multiple soldiers firing at a towering black humanoid that moved faster than their eyes could track. Night after night, screams, gunfire, and failed sweeps escalated into a whole tactical operation that captured the entity on camera before the building was demolished and the witnesses were ordered to remain silent. Now, the witness states, "I'm recalling my friend's story to the best of my ability. This account is classified according to him. Now, he was stationed at a base in Iraq, which was surrounded by a wall featuring guard posts at various locations. There were also a few areas where soldiers kept watch, including barracks. An abandoned warehouse on the base was not in use. It had massive heavy doors that opened outward from the middle and were always closed. Soldiers had to walk past this warehouse when changing shifts. So one night, while my friend was in his barracks, gunshots rang out. Everyone rushed to gear up and to figure out what was happening. Once they determined that the gunshots came from within the base, they moved toward the location. Two soldiers were stationed outside the warehouse with their weapons drawn, visibly shaken. One of the warehouse doors was slightly ajar. When they called the two soldiers for information, they hesitated, stating that something big and black had darted inside the warehouse. Now, after calming them down, a team conducted a sweep of the warehouse but found nothing. It took two soldiers to push the heavy door shut again. The following night, screams were heard coming from inside the abandoned warehouse. A sweep was conducted, but again, nothing was found. The next night, more screams echoed through the base. On the third night, another group of soldiers on shift opened fire, reporting the same experience as the first group. They described something moving too fast for them to aim and shoot accurately. Once more, the door to the warehouse was pushed slightly open, requiring two soldiers to close it again. Now, after this went on for several nights, a larger investigation was initiated, involving special cameras pointed at the entrance of the warehouse. Soldiers were stationed outside, waiting for something to happen. One night, the door was pushed open on the camera, and a figure resembling a demon emerged, screaming in horror. The guards opened fire, and the entity sprinted back inside, moving at an impossible speed. Both doors flung wide open, and it just screamed. More soldiers arrived to conduct another sweep, but once again, nothing was found. During this time, the soldiers began to piece things together. They had known that a nearby village maintained a curfew, with villagers forbidden to stay outside after dark. Upon investigating, they learned that the villagers feared a god of death inhabiting the area, which led them to stay indoors. Around this time, a specialized team arrived with advanced equipment. Heavier firepower was deployed, including my buddy, who was equipped with special recording equipment. They opened the large double doors to the warehouse and set up inside, where it was pitch black, but their equipment provided some visibility. The team formed a square with four soldiers facing each other. Now, after 4 hours of inactivity, the soldier opposite my friend began making hand signals, indicating that something was behind him. The soldier to my buddy's right was dozing off, while the other soldier across from him remained perfectly still. My friend quickly turned into a crouched position, providing space for himself and the soldier across from him to open fire. When he turned around, he saw a demon humanoid, around 9 foot tall, with piercing eyes and an ominous presence. When he opened fire, the creature moved so quickly it seemed to teleport, appearing on the ceiling. The soldiers continued to shoot, but it effortlessly maneuvered behind each of them, endangering their lives. Eventually, the team retrieved their equipment and abandoned the building. The camera had apparently captured everything. My friend was debriefed and instructed never to speak the events again, while the building was subsequently demolished. The villagers linked the demon to an old mass grave near the base, which was unearthed after these incidents. Everyone involved was given a proper burial. I know I didn't capture every detail accurately, as my friend's version included much more elaboration. The way he tells the story is so compelling and detailed that it's hard not to believe him, yet the tale is so extraordinary that it's difficult to accept as accurate. I wish I could persuade him to write it down because it's simply amazing. We got one more account. In this next account, an overnight exploration of an abandoned Essex County jail turned into a nightmare when a massive winged creature slammed into the lookout tower window with enough force to crack the glass. Its glowing red eyes, 15-foot wingspan, and bat-like silhouette have since been linked to whispered reports of the Newark Batman, a figure known among local urban explorers, but rarely spoken of beyond the ruins. So the witness tells me, "Hi, I live in Newark, New Jersey, and I enjoy exploring old abandoned buildings and locations. In May 2023, I visited the old Essex County Jail, which has deteriorated to the point of being unrecognizable. The walls are crumbling, and there are holes in the ceiling. The entire complex has been left in ruins. Over the years, it has also become a place where squatters and homeless individuals have settled, although they typically go quickly. I wanted to explore the jail for a while, so one weekend I strapped on my GoPro and headed out with plans to spend the entire night there. The locks on Almost all the gates had been cut, and there were gaps in the fences that allowed easy access. The dirt road leads into a facility. Now, I took my time walking along the dirt road and capturing a shot of the exterior before entering the buildings. Once inside, I ventured throughout the jailhouse and quickly understood why many people feel uneasy about this place. It was absolutely disgusting and foul due to the presence of transients. I decided to make my way to the lookout tower, which was the most comfortable spot I could find. From there, I could see my car in case of any problem, and I had a great view of the entire facility. As night fell, I settled in as comfortably as I could in my sleeping bag. So around midnight, I was abruptly woken by a loud banging noise. I grabbed my lantern and adjusted the knob to make it brighter. That's when I clearly saw the cause of the racket. A massive figure with giant wings slammed against the window of the lookout tower. The entire room shook, and I heard the glass beginning to crack from the force of the impact. The creature was terrifying. It had large red eyes that glowed in the light of my lantern, a black, hairy body, and bat-like wings that were around 15 foot wide. It was massive. I was shocked at the sight and started to run down the stairs of the lookout tower to escape, but I stumbled and dropped my lantern, which crashed on the steps. I was plunged into total darkness. The banging had stopped, and then I heard the creature take flight with its mighty wings, and it vanished. I believe the creature was a mix of a moth, a bat, and a human. Seriously, I think the light from the lantern attracted it. Since that night, I've talked to other urban explorers who have mentioned a creature known as the Batman in Newark. I had never heard of it before, but it seems that others have. Have you ever heard of this creature? Thanks. So that's it, folks. If you have questions, put it in all caps, and we'll try to see what we can answer. Hmm. I'm not. It looks like things have stopped here. I can't get the questions. I don't know what's going on. Well, anyway, I had to look at my phone. Now, this is from Jose Sanchez. On an episode of Paranormal caught on camera, there was a headless low crawler that appears in the hallway of an abandoned mental asylum running in circles like a dog chasing its tail. I hadn't seen that, so I don't know. Can Squatch, have you heard of any abandoned buildings being cover for government installations? Yeah, there was one in Pittsburgh, and I forget where it was at, but the witnesses were telling about it because they were going into it to explore it. I think it was an old chemical building, but there were several government types that met them at the gate. So, and they said the place was abandoned. So I know of that one. There may be others, but that's all I know. Anything else, folks? I'm having trouble seeing who this is from, but it says Trey Hudson. No. Okay, Jose Sanchez posted, have you seen that black misty blob thing that flies from room to room in abandoned warehouses or abandoned buildings? Not sure what it could be. I've heard all kinds of different things. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was just something that it was a bird or something that just looked bigger, but I don't know. Anything else? Okay. Well, look, please consider a membership and become a Fams Monsters Radio Insider. It's only $2.99 a month, and you receive members only chats with me, exclusive videos, and early case drops, priority comment replies, uh, member badge and recognition, giveaways that include paranormal books from my personal collection, as well as other perks. Now, the next Ask Lon presentation will be December 10th. It's a Wednesday. Be at 9 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Pacific time. So, folks, I thank you for showing up. I do have one more question here. Grandizer 12. Lon, are there any abandoned buildings in your city? I'm always curious about abandoned malls. Yeah, and in fact, they just condemned them all locally. Um, North Hanover Mall. Apparently, a wall fell down a couple of days ago, so I guess they went ahead and are going to just tear it all down. Though I know the inside of that place is fairly good looking. It's just that it just fell apart, so they're not going to bother with it. Any conferences you're attending from Al Staring? Not this year, but you never know. Maybe something will show up. I end up being there. Do you think Trump will give us disclosure on UAPs? I don't think anybody's going to give us disclosure. I don't care who it is. That's my thoughts. Okay, folks. Well, again,